Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles, and today we're featuring something that I don't really feature that often. It's a Japanese torpedo destroyer replay. And the reason I usually don't feature them that often is because if you're doing everything right in something like the Yugumo or the Shimakaze at tier 10, it can be kind of dull to watch. It's just you launching torpedoes every 2 minutes. And it usually only gets interesting if something goes badly wrong. However, Soto here, in the Japanese Tier 9 torpedo destroyer, the Yugumo, in a Tier 10 battle here on the Islands of Ice map, doesn't necessarily subscribe to that theory. Just in case you're wondering what that icon was at the bottom of the screen, you can see that he's running the Swift in Silence skill, which effectively means that as long as he's not detected, he basically has a permanent engine boost running. And when he does get detected, he also has an engine boost, which is useful beyond the obvious reason, but because the Yugumo is not particularly fast. It only has a top speed of 35.5 knots, and that can be a problem if you're going to play the Yugumo aggressively, and Soto is going to be playing the Yugumo aggressively. But as you can see just by looking at the speed gauge, with that Swift in Silence skill, and when he doesn't have the skill and he's running the engine boost, this thing will do just a hair over 40 knots, which is plenty fast enough. Often you'll see Japanese torpedo destroyers, and Shimakaze captains are particularly guilty of this, of never getting any closer to the enemy than they need to launch their torpedoes, which is often why you see the Shimakazes with the 20-kilometer noob tubes sitting behind the battleships, refusing to go anywhere near a cap circle, despite the fact that they're the stealthiest destroyers in the game, because why do I need to get any closer than 20 kilometers? That's the range of my torpedoes. I suppose in that respect I should probably qualify my earlier statement. It's not that watching Japanese torpedo destroyer replays is boring, because that's just the nature of Japanese torpedo destroyers. It's watching bad Japanese torpedo destroyer replays is boring, because bad Japanese torpedo destroyer captains, despite the fact that they always seem to build their ships for stealth, they take the concealment expert skill, they fit the concealment module, and then they never use that exceptional best-in-class stealth. They never get closer than the maximum range of their torpedoes, which is usually 15 or 20 kilometers. It's just a complete waste of captain skill points. Soto, of course, is not that kind of Japanese torpedo destroyer captain, so we're not going to be watching a boring replay. He's gotten his surface detection range down to an incredible 5.5 kilometers, and he didn't do that so he could cruise around safely at the 12-kilometer maximum range of his Type 93 Mod 3 torpedoes. He's used that Swift in Silence skill, along with his exceptional stealth, to get into this cap circle at Bravo nice and early, take cover behind this island, and start flipping it well ahead of any enemy destroyers, and he is sharing this cap circle with at least one of them. We assume the Benson because he was spotted earlier. His teammate in the Seattle has just popped his radar and confirmed that. And you could be forgiven at this point for thinking that any Japanese destroyer captain who wasn't an Akazuki, a Kitakaze, or a Hirugamo would be thinking, oh shit, an American gunboat, I'd best be getting out of here. Yeah, not today. The Yugumo is definitely at a disadvantage against a Benson in a gunfight, because while the Yugumo shells do individually hit harder, the Benson can get nearly 15 shots off in the time it takes for the Yugumo to reload after firing its first salvo. So it's important you don't give the Benson the opportunity to do that. You'll also notice that Soto didn't use his guns at all, and because he didn't use his guns at all, he's maintained that 5.5 kilometer surface detection range throughout, when a lot of destroyer captains might have been tempted to at least get an opening salvo off in order to soften the target up. But he didn't do that, so he's still undetected. There is more than just the Benson in this cap circle though. You can see it's still being flipped by the enemy team, and that's going to be a problem, because that's probably the enemy Edinburgh. And he may be a radar cruiser. Probably not. Most Edinburghs go for the smokescreen rather than the radar. But it's better not to make any assumptions. It'd be nice if we could actually see a smokescreen. He's now hydroed, which is fine, because he's contesting the cap and he's got a nice little island to hide behind. In fact, anybody that could have seen him earlier, even if he had shot at the Benson, didn't have line of fire because of his positioning. There's the Edinburgh. Edinburgh, you do know that this thing has torpedoes, right? I mean, he has to wait 10 seconds before they reload, but that's an extremely, let's call it brave move from the Edinburgh. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. You see, the only thing that Soto has to do to avoid any torpedoes fired by the Edinburgh is move forward, because torpedoes can't go through islands. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the Edinburgh thought he was going to accomplish there. It's not just that he ran straight into Soto's torpedoes, although he may have assumed that he hadn't reloaded them in time, but then again, the Yugumo could have a torpedo reload booster rather than a smokescreen. And there's no way the Edinburgh could have known which consumable Soto had, because he hasn't told anybody by using his smokescreen yet. Now, you might be thinking, with some justification, that the Edinburgh didn't have any choice because he'd been spotted behind the island. He had to come out. Well, yeah, but he only got spotted behind the island because he moved up to behind that island and put himself into a position where the Seattle up to the northwest or the Izumo over to the east could have shot at him. There are other islands in that cap circle that he could have hidden behind with complete safety and contested the cap. But he chose to move into a position where his choices were get torpedoed or get shot by an Izumo and a Seattle. So that one was completely on the Edinburgh. And thanks to that extremely poor position, and also the dodgy positioning of the Benson earlier, this central cap circle, along with the other two cap circles, although you can't blame those on the Benson and the Edinburgh, are now in possession of Soto's team. And now we can start doing some open water, well, not just torpedoing enemy ships, but also spotting enemy ships. Because he doesn't have to cruise around at maximum range of his torpedoes. He has 5.5 kilometer stealth. He's still going to have to be aware of any radar threats, of course. We know the Edinburgh is no longer a radar threat, if indeed he ever was. And honestly, if I'm being completely fair, I think this may be another reason why you often see Japanese torpedo boat destroyers just lurking around at maximum range of their torpedoes, because they don't actually know who is and who is not a radar threat. So who is the radar threat here? Well, not the battleships, surely. Battleships don't have radar, do they? Well, no, they don't. Wargaming were toying with the idea of giving Russian battleships radar that only detected other battleships, but that never happened, and no battleships in the game actually have radar. But if you don't know that, if you're thinking, maybe the Musashi over there could radar me at any second, you wouldn't be getting to within 7 kilometers of a Musashi that could potentially be radaring you out to a range of 10 kilometers. What about the cruisers? Cruisers get radar, don't they? Well, some of them do, but a lot of them don't. French cruisers don't. Japanese cruisers don't. Some British cruisers do. Some British cruisers don't. British cruisers like the Edinburgh, you don't know whether or not they're going to have radar until you see them use it. So, given that level of uncertainty, oh, and by the way, Soto's not popping the smoke here for himself. That smoke is for the benefit of the Seattle. So the Seattle can shoot with impunity at the targets that Soto is going to be spotting once he's finished laying this smoke screen. Because Soto knows who the radar threat is. I mean, I've got to be completely honest, I wasn't 100% sure in this battle because of the presence of some of those new Pan-Asian cruisers. The Dalian, the Tier 9. I did not know whether or not that ship actually has radar. Turns out it doesn't, but I didn't know that until I looked it up on the wiki page. And I have a fairly good idea of who does and who doesn't have radar. But I didn't know that the Dalian didn't. I was very surprised to find out that it didn't. So if I wasn't sure, you can appreciate why a lot of torpedo destroyer captains just play it on the safe side and stay well out of radar range of everything. It turns out that there is actually no radar threat for Soto in this battle. There was, but the Cleveland got sunk earlier. And, well, the Edinburgh also got sunk earlier, before we could tell whether or not it did or didn't have radar. Although the fact that it chose to use hydro rather than radar, and Soto was never at any point radared, would probably indicate that it was a smokescreen Edinburgh rather than a radar Edinburgh. Which further begs the question, then why the hell didn't it use its smokescreen in order to not get shot at by the Seattle and the Izumo, and instead chose to come out and get into a torpedo fight with the Yugumo? Again, you know, these are questions that we're probably never going to get the answer to. Just bad decision making. Another reason why, even if you do have, for example, 12-kilometer range torpedoes, such as the ones that Soto has here in the Yugumo, you might want to get closer than that 12 kilometers before you launch them. I mean, the Yugumo can launch them from 5.6 kilometers without being detected, so you may as well use that stealth window, because the closer you are to the target when you launch the torpedoes, the less chance they're going to suddenly change course and speed and avoid them. And yes, Shimakaze captains with your 5.5 kilometer stealth, cruising the map border with your 20 kilometer range noob tubes, and your 5% torpedo hit rate, I am talking about you here. Plus you stand a better chance of spotting things if you get in amongst the enemy, while always being careful not to get spotted in return, of course. And while you don't get a huge amount of XP and credits in World of Warships for damage done by your team to enemies that you're spotting, you get more in the destroyer than any other class of ship. So the incentives are there, you just have to take them. Now, I realise that many of you may be thinking, but Jingles, this is obviously a much more risky playstyle. And that's kind of true, but it's only true if you don't know the ships that you're facing. Soto does know the ships he's facing, so there isn't actually any risk-taking going on here. In fact, the only risk is if you run into something completely unexpected, but that can happen anywhere. I mean, he's just run into an Asashio at a range of 3.7 kilometers right after torpedoing and sinking the Masashi, but the Asashio wasn't expecting to run into him either, because all of the Asashio's guns were pointing at the Megami over there, so that's a double strike, and kill number 4. Now, yeah, I mean, admittedly, if you are within shooting range of a whole bunch of enemy ships and you do get bounced by something unexpected at close range, which is just what happened there to Soto, it is more dangerous. Because you don't just have to worry about the ship that you run into, you also have to worry about everybody that he's going to be spotting you for. But while that is probably going to be less of an issue if you're surfing the map border with your 20-kilometer range Shimakaze noob tubes and you run into the enemy Shimakaze coming the other way doing exactly the same thing, you still have options. Soto had to use his guns to get the kill on the double strike on the Asashio, and that bloomed his surface detection range up to the maximum range of his guns, which is obviously not good, but, well, that's why he's not been using his smoke screen until he absolutely definitely needed it, or somebody else on the team absolutely definitely needed it. And he's not hanging around inside the smoke screen either, because we all know they're torpedo magnets. Instead, he's hanging around inside the Asashio smoke screen. Or at least he's using it to disengage, score a couple, 3, 4 torpedo hits, 5 torpedo hits, and sink the Montana. 7 torpedo hits. Holy crap. It's like shooting fish in a barrel around here, isn't it? But do you see how he used those 2 smoke screens to safely disengage and get over here into Cap Circle Alpha, which has been flipped by the enemy team, as has Cap Circle Charlie. But do you see how the mere presence of a destroyer in this cap circle is forcing the Azuma and the Jean Bart over there to hard nope the hell out of there. Some Kagero torpedoes on the way. This could still theoretically go either way. I mean, yeah, sure, Soto's team are okay. Yeah, maybe not now. After losing the Kondo and the new Strashimi. I mean, up until that point, it could theoretically still have gone either way, because both teams were even on kills, and even though Soto's team had the points advantage, the enemy team had the cap advantage. But they've now completely, or they're in the process of completely losing the cap advantage, thanks to the 2 friendly ships who are contesting and flipping Charlie, and the presence of Soto himself in the Yugumo, and any second now the friendly Kagero over here in Alpha. And look at the Jean Bart B and the Azuma. They just don't know where to go. They don't know where to go, what to do. Should we contest the cap? Should we get out of here? And their indecision is what's going to get them killed. Look, I mean, just wow. In fact, that torpedo spread aimed at the Azuma is now also going to hit the Jean Bart B, because he's also reversing. That's 250,000 damage now done. The team's nearly at 1,000 points, and the Azuma's indecision seals the deal, puts the team at 1,000 points, and that's a win. And hopefully that goes some way towards demonstrating exactly what kind of things you can achieve if you actually use all of the capabilities of your ship, not just the capabilities of your torpedoes. And I realise that that can be quite intimidating, because not everybody has an encyclopedic knowledge of every threat posed by every ship that you're going to face. But you don't need an encyclopedic knowledge. All you have to do is remember this basic rule of thumb. And yeah, there are exceptions to this rule, but you'll only ever be surprised by those exceptions once. If it's a cruiser and it's American or Russian, tier 8 or higher, it's going to have radar. Give it a wide berth. A British cruiser, tier 8 or higher, may have radar, but probably won't. Still, treat it as if it does have radar until you know one way or the other. And that's basically it. Like I said, there are exceptions. There are some tier 7 cruisers that have radar, although most don't. And there are some destroyers that have radar, but most don't. And you'll only be surprised by those exceptions once, and hopefully you'll remember them when they happen, because there aren't actually that many of them to remember. And armed with that knowledge, you can finally start using your torpedo destroyers as something other than a simple torpedo maximum range delivery system. And then one day, maybe, you too can have a battle like this. That's it for today, folks. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you've maybe learned something from it. And as always, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.